Welcome to Reflect and Resist 2, Anti-Black Racism, bringing real world to the classroom via live actor simulations, presented by Live Actor Simulation at Ryerson, LASER, within Experiential Learning, a primary resource in the Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching, and featuring honored guest, Karen Arthurton. I'm Victoria Murdoch, Administrative Assistant and Simulator for LASER, and I'm going to start off by acknowledging the land that Ryerson rests on. Toronto is in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe Mississaugas and the Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. And I'd now like to introduce our Director of Experiential Learning, Anita Abraham.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us. This workshop series is very important to our experiential learning team. This is our second in this series, and these last few months of racial unrest in our world have only continued to highlight the need for our classrooms to be one of the many spaces that are safe and open to prepare our students for what is a really uncertain world. And so much harm and trauma is perpetuated in the systems that we live in and operate in, that while it's important for our students to be out in the world having EL opportunities, it's also so important that they engage in those EL opportunities from a standpoint of equity and inclusivity. And so we know that this work is hard, and I just want to remind you that it's kind of designed to be that way. It's designed to be hard. The system makes it that way. And so it's our responsibility to be reluctant, and our responsibility to keep at it, because we must, and we have this ongoing reminder and responsibility of what our role is within the institution. And when we first were thinking of a name for this workshop series, I think I said this in the first time, but I loved the name of Reflect and Resist, and it was Karen who came up with it. And we so often think of reflecting as being this passive word. We think of it as being, you're sitting and thinking about something, or resting. But for those of us who are in experiential learning, we know that reflection is such an active word. It's so alive. And when you pair it with resistance, there is such power to it. There is a strength to it. And I was just scrolling right before this session, and I don't know if anyone follows this poet, Morgan Harper Nichols, but she's this incredible poet, and she just posted this thing today that I wanted to share. If you will just indulge me, maybe just close your eyes and listen to it and think about, and maybe just reflect on your own resistance. But it's called "Here is to the quietly strong." And so here's to the quietly strong. Here is to the one who has been working through things that you don't even have words for. Even here, you are worthy of long, slow, deep breaths, even while you are currently working through all of this. Here's to the one who is realizing that sometimes singing is a sign of strength. Sometimes letting go is a sign of strength. Your strength does not need to look like anyone else's in order to be strong. Sometimes strength comes with a power pose, but many other times it is just the exhale. It is realizing that even through all of the anxiousness, here you are working through it anyways. Sometimes strength is tears streaming down your face as you breathe out the words, "It is well." Strength is knowing that you are not weak if strength looks different day to day, hour by hour even. Let this be the October you learn to embrace the wholeness of what strength looks like. Let this be the October that you are reminded that you are surrounded by people who are doing what they can to be strong right now. Let this be the moment that we remember that we are quietly strong. So there is more there, but I would encourage you to follow her and to read those words, because I really do believe that there is this quiet strength that is required of us right now. And it is in this time of reflecting and in resisting. And so, our first workshop was so well received, but it also highlighted us for a team that it was only one step on a very long journey. And so we as an office and as a team and alongside Karen, we're committed to continuing this conversation, but we also recognize that today's workshop is simply one more step. And there is so much work that is still to be done, and there is so much work that is being done. But I just want to thank you for joining us on this step, for reflecting, for resisting, for having the courage to continue to show up. Thank you to Karen and to our laser team for all that has gone into this session. And thank you to each of you in advance for what we know this session will continue on to be, and for continuing those conversations. And so I'm just going to pass it over to Jeff and leave it there.
Thank you very much, Anita, for those powerful words to start us off today. And thank you to everyone who is joining us out here as part of our group today. A special thank you I want to put out to our individuals who joined us in our July Reflect and Resist workshop. Your feedback was heard. It was very valuable. Thank you for it. The team here, everybody involved, reviewed, we discussed, we took in your feedback, and along with Karen's desire and support for this workshop, it was clear that we needed to visit this issue again and delve even deeper. With that idea of delving deeper and knowing that, we have two primary goals in what we're working to achieve in our session today. The first thing that we want to do is delve deeper into the conversation on anti-Black racism. In order to do this, we've dedicated the second hour of this workshop to that conversation specifically. Part of that time is going to be in small breakout groups. And with those smaller groups, our hope is that the conversations can be more intimate, more open, and following those breakout groups, we're going to come back into a main plenary to share our thoughts with the larger group. I'm working here with Catherine Turner, my colleague, and I turn her over to talk about our second goal.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here. Again, our secondary goal is to empower and provide you with a tool to tackle this and any other difficult conversation or learning goal within your class or group. The tool is Live Actor Simulation. And today we are going to go through step by step the process of facilitating a simulation so that you understand and know how to connect simulation experience and content to your learning goals, so that you can connect and with this shared experience to the real world lessons that you wish to have your students experience and to have these difficult conversations. It's a tool, and we're going to support you in using it.
Absolutely. So those are our two goals today: conversation around ABR, and to give you insight on how you can access that conversation through simulation or other challenging conversations through simulation, learning lessons through simulation. But before diving into the process, I want to take 2 minutes, a few moments, just to quickly introduce our team, so that if you reach out to the laser department for any support with simulation, you know who you're talking to. Obviously, there's myself. My name is Jeff Colomaze once again, and I'm one of the trainers for Live Actor Simulation. I turn this over to Victoria. Are you there, Victoria?
Yes. Hi, folks. As you saw me in the intro, my name is Victoria Murdoch, and I am a very long-time simulator with laser, but a part-time admin assistant, and especially during these past 6 months, I've been the COVID admin assistant essentially for laser. So anytime you've written to us, you've more than likely heard from me. And if you will write to us in the future, I will be the one to be responding on the laser account, the las@ryerson.ca. So thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to chatting with you more.
Oops, and I'm Catherine Turner, and I am the other trainer and writer and at Laser. And I have been writing simulation for a number of years, and part of what we're hearing today and working with today is one that I am spent a great deal of time with and I'm very proud of. And the fantastic people that have brought this to life are part of the credit of the success of this particular simulation that you'll be witnessing today. And if you need, I'm Catherine Turner, that's it.
The other person who we'd like to introduce today as a key member of our team and vital to this workshop and its development is Karen Arthurton, who will be leading our plenary discussion, who will be facilitating our simulation itself, and who will be guiding one of the breakout rooms. Karen, would you like to say just a little bit before we get into a little burst of theory pre-simulation?
First and foremost, good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us today. My name is Karen Arthurton. My pronouns are she and her, and I've had the privilege of working with Laser for a number of years. I'm a contract lecturer in the School of Social Work, and in our second year, we have a course, SWP 341, which is Transformative Social Work Practices. And the whole premise of this course is to use simulation as a route to explore a variety of topics, the one we're about to witness as one of them. It is heavily, rooted in the experience of, of deep reflection, which is where we came up with the name today, where the simulation acts as a guide for students to dig deep into their values, their assumptions, their biases, to really, in a safer space, provide, obtain the experience of what it means to go through a simulation. It's then steps to kind of like, how does this translate into practice? And how do we integrate theory into the process as well? So it's a journey of reflection, of guidance, of peer support, of debrief, and a place where I really encourage my students, as well as myself, to come from a place of love. What does it mean to work with community? What does it mean to be vulnerable in our classroom space, and certainly to now look at how it is that our services translate to a remote learning. So I'll share with you in a minute how I kind of transitioned to Zoom, because I can recall the date of March 13th, Friday, March 13th, as I was conducting a field visit, not knowing that that was going to be the last time I was going to be able to see my students live. That we had upcoming simulations, and quickly, with the support of Catherine and Jeff and the whole Laser team, translated this to Zoom. And while it was a large learning curve for all of us, I must say that it was a phenomenal experience. And I encourage my students to think of this as adding to their repertoire in terms of what it means to support folks in a virtual reality.
Thank you very much, Karen, for that. It's a great introduction to simulation. And in order to move forward with our anti-Black racism conversation, and enter that conversation through simulation, Catherine and I would like to take a few moments to give you an understanding of what simulation is, so that you can understand the tool that we're going to use to access this conversation today. Catherine, do you want to start us off?
Anyway, part of what we're doing, this piece right now came out of our earlier workshop in July. We realized that as folks were interacting with our simulated character of Peter Nyock, that they were incredibly skilled, and they did not necessarily reflect what happens in a classroom during a simulation. So this is how we began to structure this particular workshop, in order for us to present and have you experience what often will happen in a classroom. But there is some theory behind it, and we just want to make sure that we're all on the same page before we begin. In our July session, we did introduce you to Peter Nyock, Simulation 207, Fallout After Violence. For those of you who joined us, and those of you who viewed the video session, the session that was videotaped, you learned a little bit about Peter. And we went through this as we went through the simulation. By going through the simulation, you had a shared experience with everyone in the group and gained the character's perspective on what it means to be Black and what it's like to deal with racism, prejudice, and anti-Black racism. That shared experience opens the doors so that we can engage in an ABR discussion from a common ground. One of the key goals in the simulation is creating common ground or shared experience so that students can engage in conversation, reflection, and decisions about resisting, and walk through that door. Before we dive into the same simulation and clearly demonstrate how to connect to Peter's perspective, our shared experience, and our learning goals, it is important for us to understand what simulation does not do.
Absolutely.
So turning over to Jeff.
As trainers in the Live Actor Simulation program, Catherine and I often address 3 key misconceptions about what simulation is doing for a professor or a facilitator in their room. The first misconception is this one. I used this simulation last term. Why is it different this time? And the reason behind that is simulations are always going to be a new experience every time they get used, because simulators or live actors respond truthfully in character to the actions and the language of the person or persons they directly engage with. This term, a student will ask about Peter's education. Next term, when the simulation is used, a student will ask about his mother. Another term, something else. In each case, Peter's rich backstory is going to answer those questions. In addition, the way those questions are asked will dictate how much information Peter is willing to share. If a student is calm and welcoming, then Peter's probably going to want to talk openly with them. If they're aggressive or if they're flippant, Peter's going to more likely shut down. Different participants get different aspects of the story. And this is where your role using simulation as a facilitator comes into play. Our facilitators work with myself, they work with Catherine, they do their homework to understand the simulation, in this case, Peter's story. By understanding that story and some of the potential outcomes, the facilitators are able to support and guide their students so they can truly engage, so they can hear and they can pull out what is necessary from the story to support the specific lessons or the theories which the students should be engaging in or can engage in. In this case, how is Catherine going to help our students pull out the information so we can have a robust conversation on anti-Black racism? Catherine?
The second and third misconceptions are closely tied together. Why didn't that simulation address something that you were hoping for within your curriculum? Why didn't the simulator or the character talk specifically about A, B, and C? We often have this, like, the expectation is that the simulation, the simulator, the live actor is supposed to be teaching curriculum, and that's not what's happening. The answer to those questions is that simulations do not teach specific theories, ideas, lessons, or concepts. Simulation is a tool to access through experience theories, ideas, lessons, or concepts. Once again, it is up to the facilitator or the instructor to guide the students to help them understand and effectively use interpersonal skills to hear and access the information that is right in front of them, to open the door for a shared experience, to find common ground for discussion, to interact in real time and understand what does and does not work in communication and learning. It again is the students are present with a person, asking a question and listening and trying to sort through, what did I just hear? What is the next question I need to ask to learn more? And it is active, in the moment, and authentic.
Absolutely. Now, rather than taking your time and continue to theoretically explain all this, because Catherine and I could talk for days, we're going to move forward and we're going to demonstrate it. We're going to bring you into the simulation 207, Fallout After Violence, the Peter Nyock story. For the demonstration, Karen is once again using that simulation. And Karen's goal for her students, you, our participants today, are becoming the students. So Karen's goal for you is to have a rich discussion about the difficult and poignant and necessary topic of anti-Black racism. Karen is going to support the students who interact with Peter and help them draw out the information which is going to open the door for that conversation today. Now, in order for you to understand what Karen is doing as a facilitator so that you can book a simulation or use this tool and replicate it in your own class, I'm going to act as a narrator, and periodically throughout the simulation process, I will jump in to explain the rationale on why Karen has stopped or paused the simulation at that moment to facilitate. I turn this over to Karen, who is now going to set up the simulation just like she does for her students, who you are becoming today, so you understand the information you have going in to interact with Peter. Taking the time to set up a simulation is the groundwork for the students' comfort and their success during any simulation process. And as a quick point of note, in order to save some time today, we've specifically invited 3 students in advance of our workshop to be our volunteers today, rather than have to draw them out of our crowd. Karen, I turn this over to you for our simulation process.
And absolutely, what I appreciate is the ways in which this simulation never goes the same twice. It is really about, you know, how the students engage, their feedback. It is, you know, it is an organic process. So the process begins where the student will receive the simulation description. If we could pull that up, please. And I usually send this to my students about 2 days in advance. No more than that, because I find what happens is students get really anxious when they read it. And what I encourage them to do is just begin reflecting right then and there. When they read the simulation, what comes to mind for them? Do their minds start to kind of wander? Do they start to make assumptions about who Peter is? Or as I encourage them to do, is to kind of be, you know, to respond from their heart and to be in the moment with their participant, not to rehearse. And that is easier said than done, because, you know, folks might want to do research or so forth. And I encourage them to be in the moment, as we would if we were in a community center, as we are with this particular simulation. And Peter comes in, and we may or may not have a description as to, you know, what brought them to us today. In this circumstance, they received this: you are the social worker at a local community center. Last week, Peter Nyack booked an appointment with you. When making the appointment, he said, a police officer suggested I speak with a social worker. That is the description that they received 2 days prior. What I usually do also before they get become involved in the simulation is I check in with them. So I check in with their team. I find out who's going first, who's going to be doing the introduction, how the sequence of students is going to happen, second and third. By third, I encourage folks to take a break so that I can reconnect with them, debrief, look at kind of some of the tips that have come, or some of the cues that that our participant has shared with us, and where they might go. So a lot of the direction happens not always in the moment, but sometimes at the mid-break. And certainly there's follow-up, which I'll talk about when we come back at the second part of our discussion. So we figure out who's going to go first, who is usually the welcomer, and goes over some key topics or key introductory measures. The last person is usually the person who will close off, who will summarize, who will look at any subsequent resources and supports that they may have for the participant. Also, the end goal is to set up another appointment with the participants so that we can continue to follow up. Because certainly the first meeting is an introduction, getting to know each other and starting to uncover the narrative in hopes of working together collaboratively, whether it's work I do as a social worker to kind of provide resources, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the beginning stage. The other component is that it's usually a cluster of about 5 students, depending on how large our class configuration is. And each of them are playing the same social worker. While they may have their different styles in terms of how they engage or how they disclose or et cetera, they are playing one social worker. So it doesn't kind of interrupt the flow of reintroducing self. The person who starts is the kind of social worker that guides it through with 5 different kind of, engagement styles. The students at any time are encouraged to time out. And the timeout is an opportunity to say, hang on, like literally, hang on. I'm not sure where to go with this. And in a minute, we will proceed with that. That's an opportunity where I usually, my particular style is I will turn to the team, because for me, this is a collaborative engagement. I know one perspective, but my students are experts also and can provide their peers with phenomenal support. So it becomes a collaborative engagement in which I'm going to guide you through today, right? I may have suggestions, but I'm going to invite my colleagues to engage in the conversation around where would one go when we're at that moment of timeout. And as I say, they can time out as much as they want. There is no limitation. The other component that I did moving to Zoom was where I had the opportunity to connect with my students live in the classroom. That wasn't available. So what I did was offer, and most of my students were welcome this, is to offer a preparatory meeting prior to the simulation, to check in with them, to go through the sequence of how the simulation would go down, to talk about timeouts, all of those things that I would prepare folks for live in the classroom, I did prior to the simulation via Zoom. The other component I encourage my students to do throughout is to take care of themselves and to take care of each other. So, this is not about right or wrong answers. This is about a learning process in a safer space where folks can really kind of dig deep into the narratives and also to take care of themselves. For some folks, depending on the narrative, it can be reactivating for folks. And the last thing we want to happen in a classroom is for folks to feel re-traumatized. So a lot of what I also provide is emotional, physical, and spiritual support throughout it. The premise of all of this is for students to kind of not prepare, not rehearse what they're going to say, but to speak organically and to speak from their heart. And the learning process is the times where we go, I'm not sure, but to invite that as an opportunity to grow, to reflect, and to move to subsequent acts of resistance.
I was about to say, that's a wonderful introduction to simulation and all the pre-process that's involved with it. Myself and Catherine helped many years ago to set Karen on the right path for that. And I think it's a great spot for us to move forward and call forward our Peter, as well as our students to see how this unfolds and get into our conversation that will guide us to ABR.
So I would invite my first student, Jesse, who is going to engage with the introduction and move into a conversation of getting to know Peter. Jesse, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Hi, Peter. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Hey, thank you.
Yeah, I'm really happy to see you. Did you find it okay?
Yeah, it wasn't too hard, which is, I guess, change.
Yeah.
Right, of course. Well, my name is Jessie. I am your social worker today. Have you ever seen a social worker before?
No, not really.
Okay, so are you familiar with my role and how this session might work?
No, I'm sorry.
No, don't be at all. So I'll just kind of run down what's going to happen, which is that we will just, the session is about an hour long. We're going to take this time to get to know each other a little bit. If you have any questions for me, feel free to ask. What I really want to do is get to know, what's going on with you and figure out what I might be able to do to help you. If that sounds good, we'll just keep going.
Sure.
Okay. Before we begin the session though, I do want to let you know that everything that we say here is confidential. So everything that we're going to talk about is between you and me. The only exception to that being if I can tell that there's going to be some harm to you or to someone else.
Oh, so like, you're not gonna tell the police otherwise? Like,
No, no, as long as like there's no potential harm to anybody, whatever you say to me stays between us.
okay.
Okay, great. So throughout the session, I may be asking you some personal questions. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, that's okay.
Cool. I think, yeah, that's kind of the way I'm gonna get to know you and what's going on with you.
I figured that much. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's,
Why don't we start with something easy? How are you doing today?
I'm fine. It's sunny out, and you know, it's nice to kind of talk with somebody, I guess. So, you know, I'm feeling okay.
I'm so happy to hear that. I'm also enjoying some sunlight. Yeah. And how has your mood been overall lately?
I think that it varies from time to time, I guess, just depending on what happens in the day. Like, usually I'm really stressed out, but I try my best to, I guess, you know, be optimistic and look forward to the next step.
Wow, that's a really great approach. Really happy to hear that you're an overall optimistic person. That's really great trait, very admirable. I'm sorry to hear that you're feeling stressed out. Maybe we can get into that a little bit more.
Sure.
What specifically brought you in here today?
Well, to be honest with you, it's really the police that told me to come. So I just kind of showed up.
Time?
All right. I'm going to jump in here before Karen does as the narrator to give everybody out there as our participants a little bit of insight of what's about to happen. Jessie's been doing a fine job, but she's reached a point where she's feeling stuck. Karen has insight as to where things may go, and I'm sure that she's going to reach out to you to find out where things could go so that this becomes a collaborative effort. The timeout is used by the student or the professor in order to pause the action and do a check-in for the group to see what the next steps are based on information that is directly presented in the moment. With that said and understanding how a timeout works, I turn to Karen to do her facilitation.
Thank you very much, Jeff. So Jessie has introduced herself, talked about confidentiality, which we always do from the onset, and invite folks to kind of clarify any questions that they have in regards to what confidentiality means in terms of our parameters, setting the stage, welcoming, and now we have a timeout. So I guess I would begin by asking Jessie, where are you at right now? Where are you at right now? What's emerging for you in terms of next steps?
I don't know. I mean, I felt like we were connecting really well, and I felt like it was starting out really positively. Like he was really responding to my attempt to welcome him. So I was feeling really good about it, and I kind of like I knew kind of agenda I wanted to set. And then when he brought up the police once before, just to ask, you know, if I was going to tell anybody. And I was kind of like, oh, he's bringing up the police. But, you know, I figured like, okay, he's just worried and, you know, we kind of addressed that. But then he said again, like it was actually the police that told him to come. And I just kind of froze. I was like, I don't know what to do. That seems like a big piece of information and I don't really know where to go from here.
Okay, fair enough. And thank you for your transparency in that. So this is where Jessie has a team of social workers, and all of my brilliant colleagues in this room become the team. So as facilitators, where might you take this? Where might you guide folks to go?
I think it's a difficult intersection, policing and Blackness. So immediately the rapport got established, right, Karen, which is what we want.
Yes.
Sharon McLeod here, also a colleague of Karen Arthurton's, and we've talked about this simulation so many times because it's really a delicate walk early.
Yes.
Because those intersections historically are what bring us to this meeting, right? And so I think, Jessie, you want to really do your best to investigate what you know about those tensions will inform how you ask the subsequent lead-up question, right? You know we're in the middle of a crisis now, but we've been in a crisis. Social work students, we've been talking about whiteness. We've been talking about anti-Black racism. We've been talking about, right? And I think Peter is a pretty governed guy, but he's really self-protective. So it could blow early. So my counsel would be to walk very softly here, but the rapport was absolutely established. But what has to marry rapport is insight.
Crystal, you're clapping, and do you want to pipe in and add? Where might we direct Jesse in the next steps?
Yeah, Sharon, like all hands up. That was really good. Like, I think, Jesse, I wrote in the comments that I think the idea of the police kind of scared you. And if it scared you, then it must be very scary to Peter, who lives with anti-Black racism every day. It's almost as though you know something big could be unveiled and you are almost scared of it. And so so you're hesitant. You want to approach this, but you don't want it to blow up. So I think that the best step is transparency and authenticity, and saying, oh, so the police referred you. That could seem scary, or interactions with the police can be scary. Do you want to talk about that more? And admit your own vulnerability, because it's still professional, but yet you are showing Peter that you are not just an object to talk to. You are a real living and breathing person who is aware of some of the things that he may be struggling with, even though you may not have that lived experience.
So well captured, right? And my takeaways are transparency and validation. Right? So if we're scared, what might it be like for Peter in daily and potentially daily interactions with the police? So that's where the reflection also comes into it, right? In that moment, and subsequently down the days and the months to come, is to really reflect on why we're scared. So might the question now be the validation of saying, Peter, that must have been really scary for you, and moving forward from that. Anybody want to add anything before we move on? Okay. So I believe we now timed out, and we're going to move to our second student, who's going to continue the conversation. And with that said, I invite Sam to come into the hot seat.
Great, thanks. Peter.
Hey.
Hi. So thank you for sharing that about the police. I can see that that's sort of the big issue as to why you're here. And I'm sorry, that must be very, very, very scary to sort of be told to come here, directed here by the police.
I mean, yeah, you would think so, right? But I'm not even really like fazed by it anymore. You know what I mean?
Right. Okay. So you've had encounters with the police before then?
Yeah.
Right. And can you tell me what you are doing when you get encounters with the police? When police approach you, are there particular times or things that you're doing, people you're with maybe?
I'm just living my life, man, to be honest.
Sure. Well, so maybe let's, sorry, that might have been a bit broad. What about specifically the instance that brought you here today? Were you doing anything unusual? I know you said you were living your life, but it's sort of, unusual things can happen. Were you doing anything unusual when the police told you to see a social worker?
I mean, I was walking on the opposite side of the street. I don't really know what you mean by unusual. I was walking, minding my own business,
Right.
Heading home from work, and, officers pulled up as they normally do, and, just talked with me a bit, and then here I am.
Right. Fair enough. I guess, is there anything out of the ordinary about that interaction? I suppose, being approached by the police is out of the ordinary, but is there anything out of the ordinary about what maybe the circumstances there or what happened that was different from other times that you've had encounters with the police?
I mean, not really. I mean, usually the way it goes is, they stop me, they card me, and then, they apologize or whatever, and then they go about their business. But I guess the only thing this time when they carded me, it was like, hey, you should come to see the social worker. Maybe the social worker can help you.
Time out.
Aaron's muted. I'm going to jump in for 2 seconds there to help explain some of the thought process. Once again, we have a timeout. And as I mentioned previously, Karen has worked with me on this to understand where this arc can go, and some information has been dropped by the Peter character, which our student is unaware of. This is a great opportunity where Karen can help guide the student specifically towards information and open up the door for information which we want to gather. This is part of facilitating and guiding towards the theories, topics, or conversations that you want to have in your classroom. And this is how the tool is to work. Karen, I turn it over to you for that facilitation.
Thank you, Jeff. So Sam, what's going on right now?
Yeah.
Thoughts, questions?
Yeah, so seeing sort of how we had started and knowing that the police was a big thing, I sort of wanted to go down that route a bit, being as sensitive as possible, because as what we discussed, it's a fraught subject.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I don't really know where to go from he was carded and it seems like nothing else was up. Like I don't know. I came into it with an idea of where to go, and it doesn't look like that's where it's going.
Right. Okay. So let's work this through.
Uh-huh.
I'm going to turn to your peers and ask what they heard. Did Peter provide us with some cues? Were there some areas that he talked about specifically that we want to carry through and check into, right? Were there some, potential misunderstandings that we need to kind of unpack a little bit? I invite some of my student participants, my experts, to talk to me about what they heard. This is a great chance, folks, to practice. This is the safer space to do so.
So if anyone in our participant list today would like to share at this time, we'd love to hear where you think this conversation could go next. What did you hear that worked? What are some opportunities?
Yeah, this is what I heard from Sam. Sam validated, right? So there was the validation. Given the validation, right? Were there things that were missing? Were there things that Peter raised that could be further explored?
Or maybe I was perfect.
Okay, perfect, right? Let's unpack that word. Where could we go with this? Right? Okay, so here's what I heard. The questions from Sam were, what were you doing at the time? So with that, it appeared to be an assumption around the fact that Peter was engaged in something versus that Peter was was reacting to the ways in which the police continue to harass, right? The carding, right? We might want to ask more about that because, Peter might say more in terms of how often that carding happens and how come it happens. Right?
And to speak to that, Karen, thank you. Crystal in the chat mentioned that when carding was brought up in conversation, the student doesn't necessarily acknowledge the anti-Black racism component of that, which might be an opportunity.
Absolutely, right? This is the opportunity to name, and I encourage my students to name what is happening, right? To validate the fact that it is, unfair that folks are stopped each and every day for nothing, for being in the color of the skin, for, and disproportionately, does that happen to his friends?
Did Charlotte have something to share?
Yes, I think I would also like to add in terms of the carding piece, acknowledging and exploring how Peter feels about that issue, right? I think if we dig a little bit deeper, we can understand and get some understanding of his feeling. That will be helpful. I also would like, before we, along the same lines, I want to explore how Peter feels about being told by police to come to the center. And so exploring those two things.
So Sam, where might you go based on some of the feedback?
Yeah, I think the point, partially that Charlotte just made, but I think also some other people made about asking how he feels about being carded or felt about being carded. Well, felt and feels, felt in the moment and feels now after the fact. It would be a good way to go. Just, you know, it's not an understanding that I have, so get him to talk about it, basically.
Right, again, right, the transparency, the validation, right? Have we asked Peter how he's feeling about that daily occurrence of carding happening and how frustrating it must be, and that anti-Black racism is at play?
I'm just wondering why, before even finding anything of the circumstances of Peter, he may be hungry, he may be high, he may actually be in need of social work services, why there's an assumption that we haven't heard enough from him and his experiences to create validation yet. So I'm just thinking, what if he's a guy, I mean, I was sort of pretending to myself, what if he's a guy whose mother had her purse snatched and he's homeless and the police triaged him? We don't know enough to be doing what we're doing so soon. I want to know more about him.
And
I'm seeing shaking heads, so I'm completely the wrong way.
No, this is, again, we're engaging in a conversation, and I think that, you know, in order to work through this, we chat about it, because, you know, what we work with in simulation is what the participant brings to us. So knowing that Peter is talking about carding is where I would go. One, the police sent him there, and the other piece of what he's talking about is the carding, right? So that's where I would go at this time. It is guided in the way in which the participant guides us and the way in which we guide the conversation. So that's not to say that we don't want to make sure that, you know, the basic needs are met, but we go by what Peter is you know, willing to share with us, because it's reliant on trust and so forth, and validating that we've heard where he's coming from, and then looking at all of those other simultaneous pieces. Absolutely. But I go where the participant takes me. The other component is to be engaged in a conversation with my students. Sometimes it's right in the moment, and sometimes it's during break, and sometimes it's after the simulation, to work with my student to uncover and unpack the assumptions. Where are they coming from? Why is it that we, you know, might have assumed that he was interacting with, you know, that he, what was he doing, right? Those kind of components is the reflective piece of, like, why did I come to those conclusions? Anybody want to add anything?
I just wanted to add really quickly.
Sorry, go ahead, Sharon.
Sorry. Oh, was someone else?
Oh, I was just going to share a comment of Crystal's, but I'm happy to wait for your comment. Go ahead, Sharon.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that, Sam, we can also take ownership for our limits and understanding, right? Peter, you said something about carding, and, I'm sorry if I didn't give the attention to that in that moment. Can we just, maybe, can you let me go back to that a bit with you and kind of unpack that? Because Daphne, I think that is the heavy weight in the room right now. That carding is itself so trespassing, so violating, that I could be on one side of the street doing absolutely nothing and the police engage me. And sometimes that engagement can go, it's always inappropriate so we have to really manage our assumptions. And I feel like Peter will lock us out if we don't honor the indignities that he's giving us to work with. Right? And I think I tell my students, we cannot enter every experience that we have to walk with sufferers on. But what we have is theory. You know what anti-Black racism is. It is violence targeted against particular kinds of bodies that has colonial history. You know that, right? So part of it is now to, is to just own that you have a limit here. And that you didn't mean to be minimizing of what that has to be like, to be surveilled like that.
I was thinking about what like specific language to use to go into that, and you said some things there. So thank you, Sharon.
Okay. So Sam, thank you so much for your time. We're going to move on to our final student, who's going to kind of wrap us up of this component. So I'm going to invite Kevin into the hot seat to kind of move this forward and to wrap us up all at the same time. Go ahead, Kevin.
Hello. Hi, Peter. Thank you so much for disclosing all that to me. I can't imagine how hard it must be to constantly be bombarded by police and to experience that judgment and racism. So thank you for disclosing that with me. How did you feel in that moment when you were carded?
It's like, I don't mean to make it sound sad. It's hurtful, you know what I mean? Because I've been in this neighborhood for so long, never done anything except within the last year or so when things happen with my family. And it's like I still feel like no matter how good I'm being, I'm always still looked at as a criminal, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it doesn't happen to my friends. Like, my Asian friend doesn't get that. My white friend doesn't get that. But yet, always me.
So you feel, yeah. I'm sorry that happens to you. So in particular to this last moment, sorry, you mentioned something about your family just now?
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff, family
some
and
stuff going on in your family, of course, with you constantly being carded. I'm sure your family must feel the stress too. I mean, everybody, being Black and
yeah, like my mom's having a hard time.
Yeah, I can imagine that it'd be hard. I apologize for that. Is there anything more you want to tell me about this carding thing that's constantly reoccurring? Or in particular, that last event?
Well, I'm Peter Nayok from the news and everything. You may have heard that, my father, no, it's just, my father was murdered by police. So it's been hard,
Well, thank you for sharing that with me, Peter. How are you feeling at this moment after sharing that with me?
I just feel lost, It's like I don't know who I am anymore. I gotta be a different person now for my mom, and it's like no matter how much tragedy you go through, being that my dad was suffering from mental health, trying his best to do the right thing, and to just have police come and do that. You know, it's just
take your father away from you. Sorry, time out. I don't know. It's a really heavy subject right now. I feel so bad for Peter, and I just, I don't know where else to go with this. Besides acknowledging it and asking him how he feels in the moment and how he felt in the past about it. I don't know where else to go. Sorry, I can't hear you, Karen.
What I heard from you was validating, active listening, right? And yes, it is. This is where he is starting to really share with you some very, personal components of his narrative. So for us, that we have created a safer space, which provides that space to share. This may have been the first time that he's sharing that, and that becomes pivotal, right? So when I'm listening to what Peter said, he talked about his mom, right? So, that she's going through a hard time, that he's just disclosed that the police have murdered his father. And there's a great deal in terms of how is he doing, how is it that we can support him? How are we, what we might do together to kind of look at, supporting him throughout, right? But that creating of that space becomes so component, right? Where somebody hears and believes our narrative, where we can look at the initial stages to deepening that relationship and really creating a space where he can share the depths of his narrative with us. Where would other folks go? I know we're almost winding down, and if we were to do this in the classroom, Kevin's point of contact and being the third and final person really would be, the ideal would be that this is a midway point, that person 3, 4 starts to kind of wind it down, and that person 3 and 4 are really engaging with what Peter has just disclosed with us, the validation, the being there for him, talking about what it has been like to grieve. We don't often talk about grief and loss and how it can deepen our heart. The trauma that not just ourselves, but our community faces. How do we engage in that collective healing? And then the last person would kind of wrap it all up to ensure that Peter's okay when he leaves, making sure that he's physically, spiritually okay, and offering supports, whether it's, support to community agencies, whether it's my card saying, call me when you need me, right? I'm here. Just because we have one session together, I don't want to perpetuate the idea that I'm, one social worker who's going to have one session. I really want to establish a relationship knowing that Peter can entrust and come back so we can continue to work together. Any other comments before we kind of wind down this component before we move to the breakout rooms?
While people are deciding if they want to unmute, I'll just share a few from the chat, Karen.
Yes, please.
Sort of a combination of Avila and Crystal's remarks regarding showing empathy, making empathetic statements, and also a lot of people are mentioning the need for allowing space. Let Peter set the pace in terms of what he wants to disclose and how, as well as sort of future words such as, I want to work with you, as in moving forward, letting him know, giving him the promise that this isn't going to be it, that if he wants to keep working with you, there will be that opportunity.
Absolutely. And the other component is, when applicable and if only authentic, is to disclose. It's, sharing a piece of ourselves in terms of, that grief, hits our hearts hard and long, and that there isn't a linear process. And I often encourage the use of the word we, so that it's a partnership between Peter and I. Any other comments before we close off? I know that this is heavy, and honestly, You know, it is a narrative, but it is a narrative based on a true story. And it is the narrative of many of us who, you know, who may be experiencing anti-Black racism every day, where, you know, we may find that, especially in these virtual spaces, that we do not have as much time to connect with each other. And every time we do the simulation, it hurts my heart that we are in this climate, and it becomes more and more of a reason to reflect and to resist. And I'm hoping as we move to the second component of this time that we will strategize ways to not only take care of Peters, but to take care of ourselves and each other.
Just want to affirm the good work, Karen, in facilitation, and to underscore that resistance is also for social work students and for all the students in our faculty, midwifery, nursing, you know, that resistance is in your reply too, right? And I think one of the things that we could have done here, Kevin, Sam, Jesse, who is your father? Say his name. You know, that Kevin, you could have said Andrew Loku, right? Say his name, give him space, give him a memory, right? Honor him. Peter, you want to say something about your dad? You know, who was he, right? Because we only got to know him in the narrative of the press. We wanted to know who he was as a human being, what legacy he leaves, right? And this is why, for me, I won't graduate this class without talking about grief and loss, because we have to learn this literacy. And so anti-Black racism is not only in the violence perpetrated against our bodies, it's in the resistance.
Absolutely. Sharon, love you. That's what I gotta say. Absolutely.
Karen, love you more.
Right? This work, you know, and as to facilitate this, it's yes, it's a simulation, but it's also the heart. Like, this is every time I do the simulation, knowing that it is rooted in the narrative of Andrew Loku, and that this is one circumstance of many, many narratives, right? It's this emotional journey, and a journey that we take safely in a safer space with our students and with ourselves. And one of the biggest things I'll leave you with is the importance of debrief. And folks like Charlotte and Sharon and all of my other beautiful colleagues become part of that process. So the last thing I'll say is that we then, once we have wrapped up, Peter or Roshan will provide feedback to our students very much based on when I heard you say, I felt. So I'll turn it over to Roshan for a second, just to illustrate how it is that students receive feedback that they then take to the next steps of their learnings. Roshan, who I adore.
It goes the same way too. It goes the same way. I'm Roshan Valgrove. I'm an actor in the ISTC program, the laser program here at Ryerson. So this point of this feedback is not to comment on, you know, the way that anybody did anything. It's more just to say what happened in the moment and how I felt dictated how the simulation went. So for Jesse, I felt very comfortable when you established the whole dynamic of confidentiality, because up to this point, I had felt that police and you are all in the same. So it was very much, I didn't trust the space yet, but you made me feel very safe, and therefore I continued. And I was reassured that this was going to be an okay experience. Sam, I was a little bit taken aback by the assumptive questions, like, you know, what was unusual, you know, what could have happened. And it kind of perpetuated that I did something wrong in order for them to be talking to me. So it made me feel a little bit judged. And because I was so offended by that, I kind of shut down a bit and kind of backed off from continuing. But later on, there was this moment of validation when you made me feel very listened to, and you apologized and you said, you know, that's really awful and I'm sorry. So it made me want to continue and establish that trust again. With Kevin, I really liked the probing questions because it made me feel validated and justified for what was going on. And it gave me the sense that someone is finally listening to me. So I wanted to participate and I wanted to seek more support from you. I really also appreciated the space that everyone gave me to just think about what I was going to say and to gather my thoughts, because it made me feel very engaged, and therefore, you know, I wanted to open up a bit and to really grasp what was going to be going on today.
So that's the feedback that students will take away with them. And it's always kind of like this balance of like what went well and what to consider, what to reflect upon. Before, I hope folks will be staying with us, but to the character of Jesse, to Kevin, to Sam, and to Rashawn, thank you, because I can certainly attest to the phenomenal experience of working with you as simulators and the powerfulness to how you engage with our students. So I want to say thank you now.
Thanks, Karen.
Thanks so much, Karen. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much to all of our students and Roshan, our simulators. Karen, I think this is a great opportunity for us to shift our gears and move to our breakout rooms, yes? So Victoria Murdoch's has assigned everybody to breakout rooms, and we're going to move there to engage in smaller, more intimate conversations around ABR through this shared lens of what Peter has just offered us. We all have a shared experience now of understanding that one person, Peter Nyack, has experienced carding. He's had a murder, an unjust murder in his family, and we have a basis for our conversation to open up and see things through that lens because we have shared experience. With that said, I turn over to Victoria, who will be able to disseminate us into our breakout rooms, and we'll take the breakout rooms for 30 minutes before coming back into the plenary.
All right, folks, as Jeff mentioned, here we go. Thank you very much. Welcome back, everyone. I believe we're turning it over to Jeff at this point. Is that right, Jeff?
Yeah, we turn it over to me. I think what we want to do ideally is give Karen an opportunity to maybe guide us for a few moments in a larger discussion around ABR and some of the thoughts that come out of our breakout rooms. Karen?
As I was saying, we have about 15 minutes left, and I want to be, cognizant of folks' time. So if we could give maybe about 10 minutes for folks to share some of their reflect and resist discussion that came out of their breakout rooms, that would be wonderful. So if people from that group want to share a couple key components that certainly, it may be also lead us to further training or further possibilities as we move forward. So I'll open up the space for folks to share some of their conversations that they had in their small groups.
Oh, sorry.
I was about to say, I'd be pleased on behalf of the group that I was with, which was Representative TRSM, to, if they're okay with it, for me to share what I summed up previously. I see some nodding heads from my group. So really briefly, some of the actions that were suggested by the TRSM group was that they need to take a look at training for the staff first and foremost around acknowledgement, empathy, and questioning so they can challenge their own bias and in their ability to address students openly and freely. And from that as well, take a look at developing programs, whether or courses or workshops at the first year level so that students can be engaged in this kind of conversation and a safe environment right from the beginning, not waiting till they're getting placed into a co-op program or some other higher level item. So those are two calls of action that they had identified that they need to look at as a team to progress this conversation and start to shift where we're thinking from.
I want to add, we had similar conversation in terms of students being exposed or departments being exposed to simulations earlier on, because oftentimes there is a level of reticence to really talk about the issue of ABR. And so the earlier people get exposed to the issue, the sooner they'll develop that level of comfort to talk about it and be able to identify it, name it, and then find strategies going forward to deal with the issues. That's just to tie into what Jeff was saying.
Absolutely.
So.
We spent some time looking at resistance, and certainly, you know, we had some folks from different silos of the university, but, you know, putting ourselves in a position to be neighbors and to take up this 60,000 strong real estate that we occupy, and to really see each other through the spirit of neighbors. And, you know, it was pretty shared that moral courage is going to have to be part of this conversation, that some of us are going to have to look at the spaces we work in and ask questions about who's missing. And shout out to, you know, Breakout Room 5 for really interrogating that, saying that, you know, sometimes they were even motivated by their children who said, are you having these conversations at work? You ought to be having these conversations at work. So I think we're really porous right now. And I think the decisions we make right now are going to put us on the right or wrong side of history. And I think, you know, shout out to what I always call ISTC, because I'm old. And that's, you know, what I remember it as. And I like the fancy upgrade, Jeff and Catherine, but my spirit says ISTC, just like in public. But yeah, so I heard from my neighbors in Ted Rogers and EL and in some of the executive suites that we need to have conversations that are difficult, and that they're prepared to sit in some of that difficulty, because I think we love, in the university environment, we love resolution, but we love it to the extent that it's become our dysfunctional cousin. And so, you know, we need to sometimes have a difficult conversation that might be protracted, might be longer than we anticipated. And what we saw in the simulation, we need to reflect in institutional life. The assumptions need to be managed. The ways that we build relationship need to be revisited. You know, Jesse had to create some comfort. You know, Sam had to take some things back and go away and be reflective. You know, Kevin had to learn to sit with pain somebody else is carrying and not interrupt that prematurely. Sometimes we just need to be quiet and let people say, this is what I've been through here. And you don't need an answer, you don't need a solution, you don't need a resolution. You need to turn yourself in and over to hearing. And so I think that the relationship pieces came up strong for us.
Other thoughts from other groups?
I think one of the things that I took away from our group is the engagement in courageous conversations. How do we continue? This simulation has really brought, you know, to the surface. I mean, this is not new. But what I'm hearing from my colleagues in different disciplines is that how do we create space, or is there training, or are there avenues to engage with the courageous conversations that allow us to further the conversations? That was one of the takeaways, and across disciplines, because I can certainly attest to social work and our commitment. I think we're doing work, and I'll speak for myself. I continue to do the work in order to become a better contract lecturer. But part of that work is collective, with wonderful colleagues like Sharon and Charlotte and other folks, that we together engage in those courageous conversations. And that's the key to kind of moving forward and engaging in safer daily acts of resistance.
Just to add to that, we talked about that, and those conversations oftentimes are going to create a level of discomfort.
Yes.
And typically, when we get to that level of discomfort and we see people, you know, are squirming in their seats, we shut it down, right?
Gotta open it up.
We have to keep it, we have to open it up, right? And I always go back to Renata Wang's article, Knowing Through Discomfort.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right? Because what you have to get that discomfort at your pit, at the pit of your belly, for any transformative learning to occur. And so once, like when you're getting there, once people start getting uncomfortable, there are going to be all kinds of things coming out, right? And then depending on where you are, the complaints are going to come out. The leadership in the organization or your department are going to say, well, this is too much. It's creating all kinds of conflict, like what Trump is doing right now. Let's shut it down. But we have to keep going, right? The learning has to occur. And so for me, everybody has to get there to that level of discomfort, because that's when transformative, any transformation occur.
And I think we're all sites to be decolonized. Right? I think that's the other thing. It is not solely my white colleagues who engage in ABR. It is not, right? And I think that I need to also encourage, you know, we are engaged in anti-Indigenous racism at this school. We're engaged in anti-Black, anti-Asian racism, Islamophobia, right? We're engaged in behaviors that do not reflect our highest selves. And so we all are needing to decolonize ourselves. And that's, nobody, you know, at some point it's a collaboration, at some point it's your work to go and do, right? What kind of classroom do you facilitate? Do you facilitate a classroom where these things go unchecked? And what is the collateral damage of that? Do you facilitate departments, you know, meetings where this kind of lateral violence, these kind of transactions go unsanctioned? Like, are you fighting this at the level of power you own? Yeah, and I think that's for me, living in this community for 16 years called Ryerson, this is what I want us to each find ourselves doing. Are we managing this crisis at the level of power that we own? You know, you get to create the atmosphere in the classroom to some extent. How are you vetting it there? You know, whether you're working in Access, you're working in EL, you're working in the vice provost office, doesn't matter. Yeah. Are you engaged in looking at how your, you know, whatever influence you own can go towards dealing with this, because it is going to be our reputation at some point if we don't. Who we attract to this university or we don't. You know, the kind of scholarship that we pump out or we don't, right? And I just feel like we weren't fighting just because of George Floyd. Rest in power, George Floyd. We were fighting because we had the same burden. So it wasn't just about the American, all over the globe it happened, because people have histories of being violated everywhere. So we're all sites for decolonization. I just wanted to, nobody is exempt from doing this work.
I couldn't agree with you more, Sharon. Right? And I guess, you know, as we wind down, I'll ask myself the question, because I will implicate myself in the continued work of decolonizing my mind, decolonizing my classroom, decolonizing my practice. And I can't do it alone, but I must begin with myself. But I welcome each of you in the journey of self-exploration, of deconstructing our own kind of narratives, beginning with knowing our own narratives and starting from that place. And most importantly, continuing these conversations. I find it really kind of disheartening to go to a session and then it's a one-off. I want us, and I committed when we started the first one, to continuing to explore what happens and what is, I made notes from what we talked about today, the next steps that we could take. I would welcome folks to please, reach out to me, reach out to each other, because I'll tell you, in isolation, I need people around me more than ever before.
I very much agree with what you've said, Karen, that the conversation needs to carry on. The input from everybody who spoke, to the input from everybody who was in the individual breakout rooms and voiced is a step. And I'm very appreciative, and on behalf of Laser, I'm speaking for my team. We're appreciative that you have engaged in this conversation. I'm looking at time, and we're going to be conscious of that as well and respect everybody's time on that front. I think that we've got, I know I've got a heavy heart. I can't speak for everybody else. This is a difficult conversation. And I think this is a great opportunity to take a deep breath, take in what we've said. I know that our team will reflect on this and see what we can do to maybe further this conversation for a third workshop that's maybe, we'll discuss that. But at this point, I want to thank everybody, specifically our facilitators, Karen, my own team, and everybody else who joined in our conversation today, for attending the workshop, for being part of it. And I think this is a great spot for us to step back and sign off, unless there are any final comments from anyone else specifically. All right then. Thank you very much, everyone. We've hit our time frame there, and look for notes from us from future for other workshops.